If I could get people to watch only one of my videos, it would be this one, because the misconception is out there that at the time the Bill of Rights was amended to the Constitution, the only firearms that existed were single-shot, muzzle-loading muskets. And since those were the only weapons that existed at the time, the Constitution only applies to them. We only have a right to keep muskets. I'm about to give you 5 weapons that existed before, during, or immediately after the Bill of Rights was amended to the Constitution that prove that firearms technology was far more advanced than most people think. Now, all of the weapons I'm about to tell you about were not too successful generally because their design was way ahead of the manufacturing capability of the time. So this is not necessarily to demonstrate what the civilians and the people in general could get their hands on. It's simply to demonstrate that the Founding Fathers must have known about these things and would have allowed for this in the Bill of Rights. So the first weapon is the Kauthoff repeater, and it was invented by a German gun-making family of gunsmiths that had the ability to, with the action of a lever, to load powder and ball from separate magazines into the chamber and fire. And it held anywhere from 6 to 30 rounds. I don't really believe 30, because at the time that would have been a very large device, but they have found an example that, according to the markings on the barrel, it holds 30 rounds, which means you can fire 30 without stopping to reload. At the very minimum, you can fire 6, and 6 rounds in quick succession back then was amazing. The next one is the puckle gun. This was invented in 1718. That's a full 73 years before the Bill of Rights was amended to the Constitution. The puckle gun could fire 9 shots a minute. At the time of muzzle loaders, 3 shots a minute was considered doing pretty good. This thing could fire 3 times faster than the average man with a musket. It was basically a 3-foot-long revolver. It had an 11-shot cylinder that you could fire, turn, prime the pan, fire, turn, prime the pan. And when those 11 shots were done, you took the cylinder off and put a new one in. Now, the reason this didn't catch on is because the small parts were a little too intricate for people to make, for the gunsmiths to make at that time. But if you really wanted to, you could make it, and you could have this weapon. So you're saying, well, that was 70 some odd years, so maybe they just didn't know about it because it was before they were born. I have something a little closer to their time frame, and that would be the Cookson repeater. It was a .55 caliber flintlock lever action rifle that worked a lot like the Kauthoff repeater, in that you worked the lever, it loaded the powder, then the ball, and then you fired. The inventor was actually killed while demonstrating that it could fire in the rain. So not only do you have something that can fire up to 12 shots without reloading, but you also have something that's waterproof, which in that time was amazing, because if your powder got wet, you were pretty well screwed. Now, he was struck by lightning while demonstrating that it could fire in the rain. Number 4 on the list is a little more questionable. It's the Belton flintlock. And this was actually proposed to the Continental Congress in 1777. And it essentially was a gun that worked like a Roman candle. It had the idea that you'd put powder charge ball, powder charge ball, powder charge ball, as far as you could fit it, and stuff it all down into a gun where you had either a fuse that burned through, like an actual Roman candle, or you had touch holes that you could specifically light. 1, 2, 3, 4. And as long as you lit the first one first and the last one last, you were okay. They can't really prove that it existed, but the idea was out there. There are pistols that exist like this, so the idea of creating a rifle isn't too extreme. Again, it's questionable because they can't prove it existed, but they at least had the idea. And again, this was proposed to the Continental Congress, and they didn't decide, oh, if this becomes a thing, we don't want somebody to be able to shoot off round after round after round. And last but not least, in my top 5 reasons why the Constitution does not specifically limit to flintlocks, is the Girandoni air rifle. It was a German rifle. It was actually in service with the Austrian army from 1780 until 1815. That's a full 35 years. And we're talking about something that was in service with a foreign military. America's founding fathers had to know about it. The Girandoni rifle was an air rifle. And before you laugh it off that an air rifle invented in 1780, it fired a .46 caliber ball. It could fire 30 shots before the air reservoir needed to be changed out. It fired those balls at the same velocity as a .45 ACP, by the way. Had a maximum range of 150 yards, which was roughly equivalent to other guns of the time. And the defining feature of this air rifle was the fact that it had a 22-round vertical hopper. And you could feed 22 lead balls through this before you had to reload. And then you still had 8 shots left after that on your air cylinder. Now, like the Cookson repeater, the Puckle gun, and the Kathoff repeater, all these things were way ahead of their time. They required very specialized gunsmithing in order to build and repair. The Girandoni required that its user be specifically trained with the weapon because it was so ahead of its time and so different from other weapons of the day. But when all you need to do is tilt a weapon upwards, work a lever and reload, and then point it back, it doesn't take long to empty out 22 shots. Not to mention, because it was an air rifle, you didn't get the big puff of smoke that the black powder did of the day, because smokeless powder wasn't invented until the 1830s, I want to say. And the relatively low muzzle report, because it was air-powered, you didn't have that explosion causing a big loud bang. So really, if you wanted, in that time, to shoot somebody with a gun without being seen or heard, and have nobody know where you were, you could do that with this gun. And again, because it was in service with a national military, the Austrian army, people had to know about it. And there's a couple others I wanted to cover, but I didn't expect to find 3 additional examples of why I believe muskets aren't the only things allowed by the Constitution. This is not even to start talking about the volley guns, organ guns, cannons, all the things that existed long before that were well known about, and they're not mentioned. Doesn't say you can't own a cannon. Well, what person really needs a cannon? Anybody, even back then, you don't need a cannon. But they didn't say except cannons because you don't need them. Now, the knock gun was basically a sort of like a shotgun, and that it was a single rifle that fired multiple barrels at once. They were all usually pointed straight forward, but you could fire off 10 barrels of .45 caliber ammunition at once. The volley gun was this kind of a cross between the two. And if you dig and try and figure out firearms technology and substantiate the claim that the only thing they knew about, could conceive at the time of the Bill of Rights was the musket, it falls apart. And so that's what I want to get out there. Because once you start realizing that the Founding Fathers knew about more than just muskets, then you start opening up what I believe and what many people believe, and that's you can have whatever you want. Just one man's thoughts.